I am a science librarian.
A laser physicist, science communication and outreach fellow,
communications and engagement manager,
a geologist,
coastal modeling portfolio manager,
geneticist, and science communicator.
There are so many jobs that exist in science and engineering, and honestly, the more I work in the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math, the more I continue to find out about. I feel like I should know them all, but yet they keep popping up. In fact, I actually didn't even know that the job that I had at NASA existed before I applied for it. I was a science communication specialist that basically was a storyteller for all of the different science that was conducted aboard the International Space Station, and I found it through Twitter and had no idea that it existed beforehand. So I'm starting this series to help uncover all the different career paths that exist within STEM and science communications, and hopefully share them all with you so that you can get a better picture of what jobs exist in science for yourself and just for fun to have a better understanding of the awesome science that's worked on out there. For this first episode, we have an incredible science communicator to start things off.
I think being a science communicator, whether it's a researcher or anyone in that field, kind of gives you the ability to mix a lot of those different fields without feeling like, oh, I'm not becoming a professional in this one specific thing.
I'd like to introduce you all to Ray.
So my name is Reyhaneh Maktoufi. I go by Ray. I'm a science communication and outreach fellow at HHMI Tangled Bank Studios.
Can you tell me a little bit about what that exactly means?
Yeah, so it's a little like all-encompassing because so my background is in science communication research. I did my PhD work on science communication and curiosity and how to build trust with your audiences and all those kind of things, or using science fiction and pop culture references. But I also did a filmmaking fellowship, and I've been doing some production while I was with PBS Nova for 2 years. And I also do a lot of like advocacy, so doing workshops, panels, events and stuff about connecting science communication research to practice. So that basically means in my current position, I do a little bit of research, I do a little bit of, or working on research, I'm trying to help with production. And I just started a month ago, so everything is like very, very like young and figuring it out.
Yep.
A little bit of like organizing panels and events and stuff. So just a little bit of everything.
Very cool. And so what exactly does it mean to research science communication, especially in your new role, but happy to look back towards what you also have done?
Right. That's a really good question. So basically the way I think about it is like that. When you communicate with someone, right? Like I'm talking to you, right? I'm talking to you, Aaron.
Mm-hmm.
I am the sender of information, right? So I want to tell you about T-Rex kind of being birds, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I am the sender of the information. The content, the message is T-Rex, dinosaurs, and birds are like kind of the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then I decide to do that through a Zoom or social media. So I choose my channel. So that would be TikTok, that might be YouTube, or it could be anything else. And you're the receiver of information, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have an understanding. So that might have an impact on you. You might be like, oh, this is so cool. The next t-shirt I will be wearing, it will be a T-Rex and a bird together, right?
Cool.
For any part of that, if I research, I'm doing science communication research. So I might say, if Ray was not Ray, if it was someone else sending this message, how would that change things? If I would talk about a T-Rex and a bird being the same, or if I make a joke about it, or if I make this a story and tell it to you, how does that change everything, right? What about you, Aaron? Who are you? Would you even listen to me? Who's the receiver of the information? Or what's the impact? Would you change a different shirt? Would you just like do nothing? Would that make you hate T-Rexes or love birds? So any bit of that, if you research, you're kind of doing science communication research. And that could go very beyond anything that I said. It's just like different pieces of that could be a part of that research.
Sure. And so with the work you've done previously, what were some of the results that you did on a high level or were able to find? And in what forum did you actually share that?
So I've done a bit of different research because my dissertation basically was 3 parts. So one of the things that is my favorite thing was about studying science fiction and pop culture references and how scientists use those to kind of build like a mutual ground between themselves and the audiences. So it's not like, oh, I know everything, so I'm telling you everything and all the information. But we are talking about this movie, Interstellar, that we have both watched, we both kind of like it, and now we both have something to talk about, right? So it's interesting to see how we build mutual grounds, we get people to be curious, and we actually have a conversation going. In the second study, I was more curious to learn more about curiosity. right? What gets people to ask questions? Because something that is important in science communication is we don't want to just have this one-way conversations, right? We don't want to just give people information. We want to have two-way conversations. We want to see curiosity. We want to know what our audience wants to know. So part of that research was to figure out what gets people to be curious and ask more questions. What is the content of that curiosity, right? Which some interesting thing came up. For example, if you're in a conversation with a scientist, you don't always want to ask questions. A lot of time, you just want to like give them feedback and have a back and forth. You have original questions. You have really fun thoughts. So it's not that, oh, if you're talking to your audience, you just have to give them the basic information. Like your audience, especially if they're a science enthusiast audience, they want to know more and they want to dig really deep. The last part of my dissertation, though, was a little more experimental. So we wanted to see if you're science curious and if we make you curious about a lot of topics that are controversial, like climate change, is that going to make you, for example, perceive more risk for climate change or try to do something about it? My manipulation didn't work out, so we couldn't actually elicit curiosity to see if eliciting curiosity will get people to perceive the risk of climate change. But basically, we saw that people that are more curious about science are more likely to believe in the risk of climate change. So even if you're a Republican and you're a Republican that is more science curious, you're more likely to believe in the risk of climate change too.
Interesting.
Yeah, there were like some different ways we tried to talk about some of those. Some of it would go to conferences. With the first study, my good friend Sadie has a PH Drinking, a podcast. She had me on the podcast and we talked about some of those studies. Some of it I just make sometimes like Instagram content about it or tweet about it. I do a lot of like mini social media stuff. So it was more like mini bits of pieces of like communicating that around.
Cool. Yeah, the reason I asked is it's so interesting to have to communicate science about science communication. It's like so many layers there. So like, who is your primary audience when you're trying to share that? Is it mainly other scientists to help them better understand that? Or are you trying to share it with general public or other specific audiences too?
So the way I think about it is whoever is a science communicator or wants to become a science communicator, and that sometimes is a scientist, right? Who's like, listen, I want to like be better science communicator. But as we know, science communicators don't have to be scientists, right? If you're a person that wants to talk about T-Rex, but like you're not a scientist, you're a science communicator because you're picking that topic and you're talking about it. And a lot of times I think, especially with COVID and everything, a lot of us, whether we like it or not, are becoming science communicators because we're talking to our friends, our families about vaccination, about COVID, about a lot of different things. So in a way, I'm hoping that when we talk about these topics, we're kind of also having these conversations about how should we talk about science. This is becoming something that we're doing every day. So the same way we're teaching people or like giving people information about the content of science, about vaccination, climate change, we also need to talk about how to talk about those topics.
And on that note, do you have any recommendations of resources for people that do want to get better at that, even if they aren't professional science communicators?
Sometimes, like, so for example, if you're a scientist, you can see the Alan Alda Center where they have workshops where you can learn about science communication, or there are conferences like sci-comm, which is one of my favorite places. I was a participant. I was also an organizer. That is a great place to go meet a lot of other science communicators and learn about it. So that's one like organized way of thinking about it. The other way to think about it is, who are the science communicators that you really, really like, right? Especially the ones that you see them being very kind, you see them being very understanding, they don't judge people. They're very like, and this is like not my culture because like I grew up in Iran, but like Mr. Rogers, right? I don't know him that well, but he gives me the feeling of like someone that is always talking about empathy and understanding. Who is like someone who is like Mr. Rogers for science communication, right?
Yeah.
Then see what they do, what strategies they use, what kind of wording are they using? How are they listening to other people? How are they encouraging them to be themselves and getting to the why of why they care about something or why they're worrying about something. So instead of having these conversations of like, hey, this is why you should care about climate change, this is why you shouldn't reject these things, instead having this conversation of that, what makes you worry about this new science? What makes you worry about this technology? Was there something that worried you? Would you like to talk about that? So seeing like who those science communicators are and kind of like dissect some of that, I think would also be a very helpful way to learn about those.
Now I'm curious, what brought you to this point? You know, why science communication is the area that you wanted to study?
I wish I had like more of like an inspirational answer, but honestly, it was basically, and I think a lot of us science communicators have that. Like I see your channel and I'm like, wow, you're like, you do like sciencey, NASA, astronomy, engineering, printing, fashion, like you
I
have
have a lot of
more-
interests. Yes.
I think a lot of us who do science communication, we have a lot of interest and we don't fit into a scientist going to office, an artist doing specifically that.
Yeah.
We like the idea of being able to like, today I'm going to learn about dinosaurs and tomorrow I'm going to learn about astronomy and the day after I'm going to learn about something else. But I also want to express myself creatively. I love being a storyteller. I love performing. I love saying jokes and all of those things. And I think being a science communicator, whether it's a researcher or anyone in that field, kind of gives you the ability to mix a lot of those different fields without feeling like, oh, I'm not becoming a professional in this one specific thing. The specialty that we have is having all this different knowledge of different things. And I recently learned that we also are called sometimes boundary spanners, because we are like, oh, this is some of the like the studies here, and this is some of the research, and who are the networks that we're not connected to, and who are we all able to connect with and talk to and kind of like connect people in a way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so what are the things that you're combining right now? I know you do art too, you do hosting, you do behind the scenes stuff. Like what are all of your boundary spanning things that you're combining in this career?
So yeah, I do science communication research. I'm starting to be more engaged in production. I still do some work on organizing I don't want to necessarily call it educational events, but things where we talk about the science of things. So having panels, workshops, events where we bring in practitioners in science communication and researchers in science communication and have them talk to each other and have these conversations. I do comics and arts and stuff. I like using my social media to talk about different things. So yeah, it's been a little around different places.
That's really cool. And so where did you come up with the art love too? Because I've been seeing a ton of that on your Instagram too. Like where did that develop? Have you always done art and drawing and stuff?
I remember when I was like even in the first grade, I used to have my books, my class books, and I would always like draw things and the sides of it, but we also had someone checking in like every quarter, like our books, to make sure they're clean. So I remember at the end of like each quarter, I had to like get like just like clean up my book.
Lost all your art.
It was so painful. But I never thought of myself as an artist. I always thought like, oh, I'm just doodling like on my paper and everything. And that's how I learned it. Like I don't usually take one clean piece of canvas and like do my art on it. It's usually just like a piece of paper and I doodle and I doodle and I doodle and just like, that's just what I do. I think the reason why I realized that's something that I could be doing is because during grad school, it was like a very stressful time, a lot of anxiety, depression, everything. And I realized doing art was a very good outlet. And I started posting it on social media. And I was like, oh, I could post that. And people seem to like relate to some of these. I just kept doing it. And then I think at some point I realized like, oh, I don't have to be actually like a really good artist. It's more about like the way you express yourself through something. So it kind of worked out.
Well, I think it's pretty good. So, and you have a full published like book that you have available online now, right?
Right. So as you were talking about, like how do you like communicate science communication, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the same way we think about, oh, if I want to talk about climate change, I have to make it entertaining and it has to be, you know, I could use art, I can use production, I could use books to talk about climate change. Something that I was struggling with is how do we talk about the science of science communication, right? How do we take it out of like only a lecture or only a panel? And I like comics. I like very simple kind of like slice of life comics.
Mm-hmm.
I also really like animal fun facts and those like allegory stories where we learn about like, oh, you learn from like the rabbit of like, this is how life is, this is how you should be doing things. So basically this is a series of comics where each of them is about one animal and their fun fact or plant. I try to connect some of the science communication concepts and theories to those mini stories. So for example, if you want to learn about like motivated reasoning and confirmation bias, which is that idea where like, you know, like when someone is trying to like give you like evidence that like, oh, this is like the best movie of all time and you really hate that movie, you're like, oh no, it's not real. And like this review that you got, like, oh, that's a fake review and this person is not even good enough. Those are like motivated reasoning, right? And then you look for the confirmation of what you want. That's confirmation bias. So I took some of those ideas and put it in like conversations between like a fungus and like a person who wanted to eat the fungus. And then you learn a little about that and a little about the concept, and then it would go to the next one. So that was like a mini collection of stuff.
That's super fun. So where can people go if they wanted to actually find that?
They could also go to my Instagram, where on my bio, there is a link to the book. Also, if they go to LeanPub, they can look for communication lessons from the wild. Hopefully they'll find my comic book.
Love it. All right. And then just to pivot for a second, if there's anyone out there that's thinking about, hey, science communication sounds like a really interesting career path for me, what advice do you have on the type of people that would really enjoy this job? You know, both there's skill sets, but then there's also just the type of person that would just have a lot of fun in this career path.
That's a tough question. And I'm very curious to hear your thought about it too. So please do tell me after this. I think something that is very important is, and you know this best also, science communication is very hard to like go on LinkedIn and like type science communication and a job comes up. It's like science communication, that's the job. It's very made up in some ways, right? Like I think we make our own positions a lot of the times. So that might be, you might find something that says science writer, and then you're like, okay, I'll take that and then add a million other things and I'll make it my own of science communication.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, something that is very important is if you're a person that is okay with a little bit of not having structure and having to figure out your way and having to kind of advocate for yourself of saying like, hey, I know this is the job. Here's some other interesting things, or how can I not do a full-time job of this specific thing and like cut back on that, but instead bring this other valuable thing to the job? Or how about I bring some of my own funding, but also this thing that I think is actually very important. So kind of like if you're a person that is okay with not being into a rigid structure, being more open, being more creative, have more hands-on working, I think that is a very important part of being able to do science communication. And just like understanding things are like always different and changing, and you have to always come up with ideas and like be creative. But I'm very curious to hear what you think.
Yeah, well, first of all, I agree with what you're saying there. And I think it's hard because a lot of science communication jobs, there's so many different ones. Hence why I'm trying to make this series, because there's a lot of jobs that are science communication that people don't often think of that. There is, of course, the Mythbusters and, you know, Bill Nye's, Emily Calandrelli's, everyone, that's like what they think of with that. But there's museum outreach coordinators, there's nature photographers, filmmakers, researchers. So I think as long as the first, like the high level is a love of learning and continually being okay not being an expert in the thing you're trying to educate about. And personally, I love talking to the scientists and the people who are actually behind this. So a love of talking to them and then being okay doing more research and digging and being kind of the translator between the two. But I agree with what you're saying too, of like the knowledge of being able to jump from social media to video production to like art is super helpful. You don't have to do each of those things, but having a wide variety of skill sets that you can use to be able to communicate that.
Right. Yeah, I'm 100% with you, which also kind of like makes us kind of like jack of all trades.
Yes. And if you like a lot of different things, then maybe this is a good career because you can make it what you want it to be. As long as you like science, you probably need that as your core thing too. But
right. Hopefully more employers thinking about like, what is science communication, and like understanding that you're also hiring a type of personality. So you're not just like hiring a person for a job, but you're hiring an idea, a person with all these different things. So hopefully, like if employers are also like watching, give people more ability to decide what would be the right thing. Also, because I think science communicators do a lot of like freelance and under own time experiences. So we do have a lot of experience knowing what the audience might want, what works, what doesn't work. So when you go to different organizations, there might be set things. So trust us when sometimes we're like, I don't think this is going to work, or I think if we add this thing, it might be best. Or so, yeah, kind of, I think having those freedoms would also be super helpful.
Yeah, the best working environment is the one that really values and trusts and gives you that leeway to explore those other options. Because also our field is changing all of the time. So like, even if I told you a year ago this was the best thing, trusting that I tell you it's not now is also very important.
Right, 100%, yeah.
So now what's next for you? We talked a lot about your research that you did for your dissertation. What is your focus now going forward?
So one of the things that I'm hoping to be able to do is finding more ways to just communicate the science of science communication. So not only alongside the research that I'm doing, I'm hoping we can find more ways of making the science of science communication fun, produce content about it, produce video content, art content, making that a part of our activities and campaigns. So for example, a lot of times when we're working with like children and students and stuff, we're like, okay, we're going to teach you about biology. We're going to teach you about this and this and this. How can I very early on teach you about best practices and communication skills? How can I very early on teach you about cognitive biases, which is the reason why we fall for misinformation a lot of the times, right? So what do you need to know about yourself and about other people, so that next time when you see misinformation, you're able to say like, oh, I have these assumptions. I really want this to be true. So I'm going to click on it and I'm going to share it, right? So a lot of these things are basics that we need to actually talk about it more and engage our audiences with it. But we can't continue doing that through lectures and panels. We need edutainment too. Like even I was watching Mr. Mayor in one of the episodes. One of the characters is like this is a TV show, but they're talking about the science of science communication, because one of the characters telling the other person that you can't just like go in different communities and tell them about like fracking, climate change, and be angry and just talk. You need to connect with them, and you need to do this, and you need to be empathetic, and you need to use all of these conversations. And I'm like, I'm sure they had like a science communication expert helping them with this, because these are like 101s. This is not just someone like thinking of like, oh, just be a better communicator. Like these are 101s. And I think that's one of the things that I'm hoping to do, where we bring more of that in education, in entertainment, in different ways we produce content.
That would be super fun. Do you have like a ideal product that you'd love to see out there to be able to share that?
I think I'm biased. I like YouTube videos and stuff. So one of the two things I would love. One is just more and more YouTube products where they talk about the science of science communication in an entertaining way. The other thing is Hollywood taking up a lot of these concepts and have their heroes and their protagonists using the science of science communication to talk to each other. Because a big part of like the way we talk about science is modeling our heroes, modeling the people we care about. So if I see, you know, the next person who is like, I don't know, like is in Jurassic Park and is like talking about like some weird technology, is actually being very curious and empathetic in the way they're talking to other people. It's not just like, oh, idiots who don't believe in what I say, but it's more like I understand where you're all coming from, right? Or showing those like how we change as people and how we can hear each other and become better because we're empathetic towards each other. So I think those two are my top two.
All right, I hope I see him out there then.
Yes.
All right, and last thing I'll ask is, if someone was watching this and was like, hey, that's exactly what I want to do for my career, do you have any advice on how to become a science communication researcher?
Researcher, yes. So I think something that was helpful to me, I came to grad school not even knowing that science communication as a term exists, even though that's something what I study, because I was more a health communication person. And something that was very helpful is just knowing what the keywords are, right? So that when you go look at the research, you know what you're looking for, right? So for me, it was very simply like the word science communication. And then you have like misinformation, curiosity, public engagement, public understanding of science, which is, we like more to talk about engagement rather than understanding, citizen science, like all of those different things. So find some of those keywords and then go read about it, go Google them, see who comes up, who are the names of the researchers you might be interested in, where are the universities that might be doing some of those similar research. So surprisingly, keywords and Googling them.
Hey, that's a lot of science communication too, you know?
Right.
Well, and what was your actual undergrad in?
Oh, I studied physical therapy in Iran.
Okay.
Yeah, and I worked in a pediatric hospital for a year as a physical therapist. And then for my master's, I studied health psychology, which is a lot about like health communication, behavior change, doctor-patient relationship, which really prepared me for science communication.
Okay, yeah. Everyone has their own individual path. So there's stuff you can do, but then you just got to find your own way there too.
Right. Because then the PhD was in media, technology, and society. So I didn't have to like pick one thing. I was like, okay, there's a little bit of media, a little bit of technology, a little bit of society and health communication. So it kind of helped.
Very nice. And so if people wanted to find you online, where would be the best place for them to do that?
I'm mostly on Instagram and Twitter and recently TikTok, and I'm not very good at it. I'm like making some like really low quality.
I followed you.
I know, yeah. And I'm at the Cosmic Ray. That's TheCosmicRey.
Okay. Very cool. I feel like that was very in demand after Star Wars, your handle. Yeah. So I'm glad you got that ahead of time, but yeah.
Oh yeah. Because I was like collecting a lot of my data at the Adler Planetarium for my dissertation. And I remember like when they were talking about cosmic rays and stuff, I was like, that would be my handle.
Yeah,
so
love it. All right. Well, thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd want to add too?
That's all. Thank you so much. I appreciate, like, I think there is so much that like I realize myself when someone starts like asking me questions, which I think is a good way to think about science communication, that it's about like asking other people also questions and let them figure a lot of things on their own and having those conversations in head going on. So thank you for that.
No, sure. I have so much fun asking him too, because there's so much about science communication that I still don't know too. And I think we are all as science communicators in the mindset of wanting to know more about this, our field, about science, about everything. So it's just a blast for me to be able to hear all this from your perspective too.
Thank you so much to Ray for spending the time chatting with me and sharing all this information with you all. I had so much fun talking with her. And actually, if you want to see some other content from my conversation, I filmed some exclusive shorter clips for TikTok and Instagram that should be going up this week, as well as I made a Q&A article with some of the highlights from this, so you can access all of that down in the description links below. And if you have someone that you'd like me to interview for a future episode, please comment. I'd love to see your suggestions and things that you're interested in learning more about. And on that note, subscribe and like if you want to see more content like this. I can't wait to take you all along for the ride.